My name is Meera Estrada. I am a freelance journalist, and let me tell you a little bit about my journey, where it all began. So I was born in Leicester, England in 1978. I have an older brother, and we immigrated to Canada when I was about 3.5 years old, and we moved to a little small town in Ontario called Brantford, Ontario. I had my first few years as a Canadian in Brantford, and then we came to the big city, to Toronto, where I have been since. Growing up, I had a very, our family is a very, very tight-knit unit. My brother and I are still best friends. We always talk on the phone every day, really, really close to my mom and dad, who only live 5 minutes away from me, still here in Toronto. I'm married with 2 kids. That core family unit, I'm very lucky to have had that and it to be such a supportive, positive relationship. For my family, on my father's side was extremely poor. He has 3 sisters, who unfortunately all 3 sisters have now passed away as of this year. And in India, growing up, being from a very, very poor family, I visited his childhood home in a village in Gujarat. My dad unfortunately lost his father at a very young age from asthma, which is something that one shouldn't have to perish from, but he did because they just didn't have the money to afford asthmatic medication. And so that was my dad's childhood. My mom was in a little bit better position. My grandfather on my mom's side was very, very adamant about education. And even being from being born into the low caste, what then we would call untouchables, now Dalits, my grandfather insisted on learning how to read and write. He sat outside of a classroom so he could learn to read and write. And because of that extra education, they were able to leave. Actually, they left India. My mom moved to Africa, to Kenya, when she was 2 years old. And then she ended up going to England from there, thanks to colonization. One of the things is that they could move around. And she went to England alone when she was 18 years old, and she studied and became a nurse. And she met my father on a trip to India. And because she brought my father over, she was able to get him through university as well in England. And we're very, very fortunate that with that upbringing, my brother and I were born in England instead of the conditions that we could have been born in India. I actually haven't been back to India. I've been to India several times. I haven't been back for about almost 15 years now. And I would love to take my husband to India for him to see. I want to take my children to see this. This is where it started, and this is where we've come to. I want them to know where we came from. Growing up, I actually had a lot of South Asian friends. I still do. My family was very, very much involved in the temple. I would attend Gujarati language classes weekly. So I was surrounded by the Indian community. And I would actually hear, it was very normal to ask, what jat are you? Which is in Gujarati, what caste are you? And my parents had always told me when I was younger, we don't believe in that. We're Hindus. We don't believe in this, segregation of caste. We just don't believe in it. It was not, but I would always hear it around me, and I would just say, oh, I don't believe in that. Not really understanding why I was saying this. When I was 15 years old, we had it was like pretty much a life-altering conversation. I remember, and it's funny because growing up, my brother was a big reader. He would read through books in a day. And he had come upon the history that we hailed from this King Solanki, the dynasty of the Solankis. And so I was a very, very girly, even to this day still am. And so I thought, oh, I'm a princess. And I would always go around saying I'm a princess. And so I remember when I was 15 years old, my parents were very serious, and they said to my brother and I, you need to come downstairs. We need to have a serious conversation with you. And that is the first time that they explained to us the caste system, and that we were born into the lowest rung of that. At that time, we always just used the words untouchable. My dad said, we are untouchable. No matter what we do, we are going to be seen this way. And that is why you children need to focus on your education. Education is the only way out of this cycle. And I remember even then, I'm like, that is so stupid. I'm not an untouchable. I'm a princess. And they're like, no, this is what it is. And even though I really dismissed it in that moment, something clicked and changed for me, because then when I would be in Gujarati language classes and I would hear people talk about it, I would notice, and I would notice the much pride in caste. There was the Brahmin societies, and there was the Kshatriya societies, and all of these dominant caste societies, and people would openly talk about it and show very much pride in their caste. And that's when I sort of began to shrink myself, because I didn't want to reveal what I knew. I was scared. I didn't know what it meant, what people would think of me. And so really, after I knew what it was, I noticed how much it was around me, but I also noticed how much silence there was of people of so-called lower castes. There was no mention of us unless it was something like derogatory jokes, but there was very much a pride in sharing your dominant caste. Everything was very subtle, but still played such a big role in my growing up, because I didn't reveal my caste to anyone. My two best friends as well, who are both from dominant caste, I didn't speak about it. I was very, very scared, because my parents were, I could see the fear in them of being found out. And I remember my mom saying, when she first told us, she said, do you know, because I said, why don't we just tell people about this? This is so stupid. My mom said, do you know, if we tell people, because I see it now from their perspective, they're immigrants. We don't have any family in Canada. Either our family is in England or in India. To them, all of their family is made, their friendships. And so my mom said, do you know how many people will not talk to us? And she named off these different aunties' families that would not speak to us. And I thought, well, why do we want to be friends with these people? And I think for them, that's all they had. They're already in a country where they are othered. They don't want to be further othered from their own community. And so I started to feel that way as well. And where it really hit me, and it makes me so emotional still, is in my 20s. And everybody around me, I have a big group of South Asian friends. People are playing matchmaker with each other. There's the aunties at the temple playing matchmaker as well. And people would always just assume, because we were so well educated, my father, my mother, my brother, myself, that we must be from a dominant caste. And they would always say, oh, Meera, we have this boy, he's from such a good family. And a good family meaning a dominant caste family. And I would think to myself, but I'm not a good girl. How will I ever say this to this family, that I'm not a good girl? I remember always thinking, I'm not a good girl. I'm not good enough. And I would see my friends getting married, and they would marry people that are of the same caste. And, that pride of, oh, I married a Brahmin, even intermixing between Hindus and Sikhs. There was always this pride of marrying somebody from a dominant caste, that I think I started to slowly move away from dating people of my own culture, because I was so fearful of, I would never be enough. For my in-laws, I would just never be enough of a daughter. Nothing about me could make me good enough or pure, because I wasn't. And I look back and I wish I was nicer to that girl and kinder to her, because I now realized none of that means anything and does not define me at all. But I really made it part of my identity in those early years. I ended up actually marrying somebody who's not Indian at all. And it's funny, because even in marrying somebody that's not Indian, my parents felt they really needed to share with his family what caste we are. And so when we had the get together of meeting each other's families, my dad said to my mother-in-law and my uncle, he said, you know what, we are untouchables, and we're the lowest caste. And I remember my mother-in-law's face, and she's like, what is that? I don't know what caste is. I don't know what it is. I don't care about it. And I cannot explain to you the way my heart swelled. And I thought, finally, it was just like the biggest relief came over me that finally I am not going to be judged for something that I have nothing to do with. This family is going to judge me solely on my character. And it felt amazing. And so I would always say to my dad, I said, Dad, one day his story is so powerful about how, he overcame. And so I always said, Daddy, one day I'm going to make a movie about your life. And he said, no, just wait till we're gone. I don't want to talk about any of this. It took me a long time to come to terms, and a lot of that is education, which is key, and educating myself more about what is the caste system. And I had a breaking point of I need to speak about this openly. Keep in mind, none of my friends to this point I've said anything. I had my second child. I was 38 years old, and a really good girlfriend of mine who I had been friends with for 20 years. I knew she had just recently gone to India at that time when surrogacy, overseas surrogacy, was an option. And I had read somewhere, because I was a journalist at this point, about lower caste surrogates being paid almost $2,000 less than a dominant caste surrogate. And, I have this very curious mind. I wanted to know about it. And she had just gone through the process. So I was very interested in knowing. And I asked her, and I remember my mom came with me to her house. I had my baby with me. Her babies were there and her mother was there. And it was this, like, lovely sit down with my girlfriend. And we were sitting at the kitchen table. And I said, is this true? I read this about the surrogates in India. And she's so matter-of-factly, she's like, yeah, of course. She said, I would never get a lower caste surrogate. I wouldn't want my kid to be stupid. And as soon as she said that, my eyes welled with tears. I knew my mom, who was sitting just a few meters away, she heard it and she saw me, and she just sort of looked at me like, don't say anything at this moment. But I told my mom we need to go home. And the second we got into the car, I burst into tears. I said, Mom, I can't do this. I don't know who my own friends are. And now I have a little daughter here, and I will not have her go through that, because there are parents like my friend who are going to teach their kids this exact thing, and the cycle's not going to end. And it's the first time my mom said, you know what, Meera, you do it. You say whatever you need to say, and you tell people. And I think because she felt it too with my little daughter there. She's like, we are not doing this. We're not doing this again. And so it was that was the breaking point, an amazing breaking point, because from there, I just went full out. I gave the first time openly speaking about it was a large Women's Day event. And it was with the Southern African Embrace, an amazing charitable organization. And I remember it was all women at this event. And I asked my dad to come. And I told the story about growing up in casteism and how that had shaped my identity. And at the end of it, the whole room was in tears, and they all stood up and looked at my dad, and they gave my dad a standing ovation. And my dad was in tears. And to me, it felt like the first time he felt like he was heard. And it was a moment of trauma and healing at the same time. And I think speaking about it has been really powerful for my parents as well. And I'm very, very lucky that I had their support in speaking about it. I always say silence speaks volumes. So I've spoken about this on national television. I've written articles on this. I'm very open, and I can see who the friends are that are receptive and show support, and those who choose to remain completely silent on this, like the friend who I'm quite sure has seen me on television or my work. Because if you have a social media profile and they seem to see everything else, I don't know how those particular things they don't see. But it's never been brought up. And there are certain people that I notice that they see everything else I'm doing, but they don't see that, or they do see that, but they choose not to respond. And that has spoken volumes to me in who is a true ally and who is not. When I look at who has supported me, yes, there have been some South Asian friends who have said great job or sent me a little message on the side. It is always my Black friends and people from the Black community, even who I may not know very well, who will push forward the content I'm speaking about in terms of casteism and show their support. And I can't not thank them enough. And I also want to talk about when it comes to Black communities, South Asians, especially during the George Floyd protests and that whole time in 2020, they stood up so loud and proud for Black Lives Matter, and so much that yes, we are allies and we aren't the racist ones. We are here to help the Black community. Yet so many, a vast majority of them, would never speak up about casteism. And I find the hypocrisy there is it's just rich how hypocritical that is, because it shows caste fragility and it also shows caste privilege. I think what's happened in Seattle, becoming the first city to make this officially, banning caste discrimination, is huge because, first of all, it has caused so much attention around this issue. The amount of articles I have seen from Al Jazeera, from here in Toronto, on CP24, Associated Press, I'm so glad so many of these big major news outlets are picking up this story, but also it's a historic moment because this can now cause a ripple effect for other cities, and not just, we're the neighbors, right? We're the neighbors of the North, and what happens there also has an impact on what happens here in Canada. And I do think if we acknowledge its existence the way that we want to ban discrimination, men and women's rights, gender equality, race equality, if caste equality is there, if it is there in our rulings, in our governing bodies, if they are speaking about this, it legitimizes those of us who are going through this discrimination. And it's happening not just for me, I felt it very much in my personal life. It is happening in workplaces. I hear from renters from the Dalit community, new students who is asked on their rental application form what caste they are, and they're being denied housing based on caste. And it's happening. As people are migrating from India to different parts of the diaspora, it's migrating. Casteism is migrating with it. And one of the places this is an unlikely place, but it shows how deeply rooted it is I take a lot of Ubers. I have epilepsy, so I don't drive. And I love having conversations, with my Uber drivers. We always get into these great conversations. And a lot of them are young South Asian men who have come here to study, sometimes young South Asian females as well. And we'll get into a conversation about India and politics. And I want to talk about caste, but I'm actually fearful because being that passenger in the Uber car, especially as a woman, I'm in a very vulnerable position. And I still don't know what this person driving me, what their views are on caste and how I might be treated in this car that I'm sitting in if I speak about it. And I think that speaks volumes because I still have that fear, and I think it is a very legitimate fear. I think one of the biggest things I want to say is what really hurts people in my community is the gaslighting and making us feel that this does not exist. And I feel it on a very personal level. I have a cousin, not so young anymore. She's in her mid-20s. And anytime that she sees, I've spoken about this on television or written about it, she will call me crying. And I said, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And she'll say, because exactly what you said, how you felt in your 20s is how I feel right now. She said, I can't tell any of my friends, and I'm scared about getting married because I'm scared of what these families will think of me. And that breaks my heart because here we are 20 years later and she's feeling the exact same way. And it's for a very real reason because she's going through those exact same things, hearing those same conversations in her circle of friends in England. And so it's happening in England. It's happening right here in Canada. It is happening in the United States. And so when people of our community gaslight us and say this doesn't exist and don't talk about this because we're already a minority community, and we don't want to be discriminated against. And it just makes me pause and think, so it's okay for you to discriminate us, but then you don't want yourselves to be discriminated, but it's okay for us to be double discriminated. It's just I don't understand. And so I wish that gaslighting would stop, and I wish people in our community would speak up, because like I said, the silence is speaking volumes, and to me silence is violence in this fight. It is not helping in any way. And I think Cornel West, a professor, something he said really stood out to me. And he said, casteism and racism are institutionalized forms of hatred. They really are, and we need to treat them as that. I don't want to hide this from my kids at all. I feel like right now they're 7 and 10. They're quite young. I don't want to put this on them. It's a very young, innocent time I want them to have. But I do want to have the conversation, but I will approach the conversation differently than my parents did with me. And I don't blame them in any way. They were coming from a different place, of very much a real fear. What my father endured in India, the things that my mom doesn't even wish to speak about, because when it comes to women, there's a whole sexual exploitation of Dalit women as well. And so I very much understand their fear and why they spoke to my brother and I the way they did. They were trying to protect us. I want my kids to come from more of the place where I am at now, which took me 40 years to get to, of having pride in where I came from, not shying away from who I am, and educating those around me who may not understand this is what it is. This is why we don't believe in it. I mean, and they're starting, like, the book Trauma of Caste, I think is fantastic. I would have my children read that. I participated, I was one of the authors in the Untold anthology by Brown Girl magazine, where I shared my story. I want my kids to read my story. I want them to know this is the community that we were born into. This means nothing about who you are. And I tell them all the time, I said, I want you to do well in school, sure. But the biggest thing I want to see from you, are you a kind person? Are you a good person? Do you have empathy for people? That is the judgment of your character. And I want them to know that is what will define them. That is what will make their identity. But you should know where you came from. I feel like people often ask, what are you going to do about it? What will you do to fix this? And I always think, why is the onus on me to fix this? This is a societal problem. I didn't do this. In the same way people look at Black communities and say, how are you going to fix this? Why should they fix it? They haven't done it. If we are so proud of our culture, and I haven't converted religions. I'm still a Hindu. I believe strongly in my faith. I feel like my faith has been perverted by people, not the religion itself. It's people in every religion. I feel like it's people who pervert the religion. And so I feel the onus is on all of us. If we are proud of our culture, part of that pride means also peeling back the layers of the parts that can be fixed. We talk about colorism as well, and, misogyny. And if people who are part of our culture are able to speak about those things, I think they need to put that on their agenda too, and be mindful of this. And it's the way that, and I think, when it comes to racism, the way that we've all had to stop and pause and say, how am I part of the problem? I think as South Asians, all of us, regardless of our caste, we need to stop and think, how am I part of the problem? What are the small everyday actions I can take to help eradicate this? Why am I still part? I have friends who are still part of the Brahmin Society of Toronto, of Ontario, of Canada. Why? Ask yourselves why. Why are you part of that society? What does that society mean? I think, everybody, if we can take pause when it's time to think about other issues like women's rights, like race rights, I think we should also be able to take pause and reflect on caste. And am I finding fragility in that? Is there something that is making me feel guilty? And it's okay to feel those feelings, but acknowledge them and then take action to rectify them.